Welcome, everybody, to our webinar today on education continuity. And I'd like to hand things over to our host for today, Shelly Palmer of the Palmer Group.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Shelly Palmer. I am the CEO of the Palmer Group. We're a tech strategy and solutions firm based out of New York City, but now in exile and points all over the globe. Like everybody, we're working remotely, and I'm glad to have you here today. We are going to talk about the most important topic that any of us have in our lives, our future, our children, our posterity, and how we're about to educate them and how that's changing. Some schools are back in session, some aren't. Some colleges have started up and not been able to continue. Others are persevering. The pandemic is not paying attention to politics. Politics may be paying attention to it, but it doesn't change the fact that we have to figure out a way to safely interact with others, and we also have to figure out how to communicate with the tools we now have to help kids of all ages get the education they absolutely need. It goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. We have experienced something between 8 to 10 years of social innovation in the last 6 months. Things that were completely sacred. Everything from movie opens to telehealth have been completely transformed. Even April 15th got moved to July 15th. Truly, nothing was sacred in 2020. Importantly, there's a giant difference between online education in concept and in practice. And today we're going to discuss really what the subtlety and non-subtlety of those differences are. A lot of us have experienced online teaching, and it's been called online education. And what that is basically is people pointing a camera at a teacher, whether it's a webcam or another kind of cam, and trying to record and or transmit the lesson as it would be given to students as if they were in class. But we also know from Silicon Valley that there's a ton of technology that allows for online learning, very different from online teaching, where students interact directly with the computer, and the computer program, whether it's set up for them to be an audio learner, a visual learner, a graphical learner, will work at the student's own pace and become adapted to the student's not only learning style, learning capability, but also conceptually their grade level. So the difference between online learning and online teaching is pretty profound, but everyone doesn't have the same tools or technology available to them. And of course, it's not a level playing field. It's not even close to a level playing field. Depending on where you live and your economic condition, you may have access to the best broadband connections and the finest computers, or you may not have access to anything. Or maybe you're doing what one of my friends' kids are doing, which is you're driving up to the public library and sitting in the car so the kids have access with their Chromebooks to a Wi-Fi network because they just don't live where there's available Wi-Fi. These are all monstrous problems, and we have to tackle them together. We have an amazing panel for you today. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves, and then we're going to have what I would lovingly call a Socratic discussion for about a half hour on the topic. I may or may not take your point of view, but I am going to try and keep it interesting. So let's start with Casey. Come on, introduce yourself, and then we'll move on for some quick, like 1-minute introductions, and we'll start our combo.
I'm Casey Borman, relatively new to the education space. About 2.5 years ago, I started teaching at UCLA. Before that, I was in asset management, so really night and day type of going from an institution where we would have had NYNJA as a backup to Zoom, as a backup to Blue Jeans, all playing off each other in case one was hacked by cyber criminals and all sorts of redundancies. And now I walk into a classroom that still has a VCR in it, a chalkboard with the white kind of chalk, and I had a full tech team supporting me because there was hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. And now I'm at the bottom of an academia type of situation where I've got to be scrappy if I want support. And so it's interesting, and that's my background. And so I'm probably going to give you more problems than solutions, Shelly.
Well, you know what?
And hopefully that will solve them.
We may have more problems than solutions. JR, tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about yourself.
How are you all today? And thank you, Shelly. I'm Guerrieri, the co-founder and CEO of the NYNJA platform. I've been in technology pretty much my whole life, serial entrepreneur. And 3 years ago, we had a communications problem. We were training people in different countries, in different offices, in different languages. And a few of my colleagues and friends got together and said, hey, what if we built a true unified communications platform? Right now, we're sending stuff through WeChat and WhatsApp and Skype and email, and all the assets were just all over the place. And it was never a sticky conversation where we all knew where all the assets were. So 3 years ago, we started building NYNJA, and in about last January, we actually launched the platform. And it is everything you would expect to find in a conference platform, a collaboration platform, as well as geared towards education, training, and teaching. And that's who I am.
Fantastic. Dr. I.
Hi everyone, my name is Ai, and really honored to be here. So for myself, I'm a professor dropout, and I spent almost 2 decades in higher education, and I taught in the classroom for 10 plus years. And I think the current education model is really broken on so many levels. And what I discovered from my journey is that it is very hard to disrupt the current system if I am in the system. It is much easier for me to disrupt the system by being outside the system and creating a new model. So that's why I resigned and started to build my own school, which is called Classroom Without Walls.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to everybody. So let's start this discussion thusly. Dr. I said it best. Education is broken. It's irreparable. Discuss.
I can start because I started this. So like, for example, after teaching in the classroom for so many years, I got so annoyed by the students. They always ask me, Dr. I, will this be on the exam? Dr. I, is this an A idea or B idea? Dr. I, am I going to earn a point, lose a point? So learning has become equivalent to GPA. But like, so much research has suggested that, for example, GPA is actually inversely related to innovation. So in other words, if we want our students to be innovative and creative, and GPA is not the right benchmark to evaluate our students. So like, I think that is a big problem that really slowly kills my joy in teaching, because I'm basically teaching to the school requirement, not teaching for the sake of learning and for intellectual discussions.
So I'll just say the following. Years ago, 10 years ago, I was brought to the UN to moderate a very similar panel with esteemed educators, some of the most famous educators in the world. And we're on stage at the UN, and I asked a question. I said, it's the 21st century now, and the entire body of knowledge of mankind that is publicly available, which is a fraction of the total body of knowledge of mankind, but the publicly available body of knowledge of mankind is searchable within 0.02 seconds. You just need to know how to search. Knowing that, and with that as a axiom of our world, what is the baseline of education required? Is it K through 6? Is it K through 8? Do I need to teach myself to teach myself? What is the baseline of education? I asked this group, an amazing group of people, half a dozen incredible educators, and they wouldn't answer the question. They wanted to know, well, then what is your education for before we answer the question? Like, why do you want to be educated? Casey, why do I want to be educated?
Well, it's an interesting question for liberal arts colleges today. They're trying to figure it out. Luckily, I teach a really practical course in terms of, I teach mostly, financial analysis. So most of my students want to be educated to make a lot of money, not a ton of idealism, but to dovetail with, and a lot of it isn't searchable. Good analysis is not something you can search on the web. What you can search on the web are experts. You can see a million videos on financial analysis by somebody like Peter Lynch or Warren Buffett. So in terms of educating my students, I have to get them to interact with one another, which was much easier when we were all in a classroom together. If I am going to compete with Warren Buffett in terms of teaching financial analysis, then I can't just have them memorize certain things to do well on a test. As Dr. I was saying, you really need to teach them some critical thinking, because it's not just about Googling facts, as you're alluding to, Shelly. I want them to know what those facts mean and how would you apply them in the real world. I'm also a lawyer, so it's not just about knowing the law. Good lawyers, it's not just about knowing the law and knowing the facts of the case, but how do you apply those? How do you apply the law to the facts of the case? Because that's the difference between the $1,000 an hour attorney versus the person right out of law school.
I mean, it's clear that the most successful workers in our business, which is the consulting business, are people that know how to teach themselves how to teach themselves. They'll solve a problem by knowing how to learn what they need to learn to solve it. And that's not something that you teach when, as Dr. Aya said, GPA is the prime focus, because as you know, when outcomes and incentives are that misaligned, you get exactly what you're governed for. And if you're governed for grades, you're going to get grades, but very little else. JR, what do you think the role of technology is in the solution to this kind of very well agreed upon problem?
Well, I feel that it needs to be as real as an in-person experience to maximize it. That's why people come together in a classroom, to get that feel, that touch. And I feel if a product can deliver that stickiness of, I feel I was actually at a networking meeting, I feel like I was actually in the classroom, and when I, finish that meeting, I can go back to that same group I'm in and reread the documents that were sent to me, the PDFs, the files, the graphics, and go over it. And then also, after it's over, be able to ask my teacher questions, like if I stayed after class and asked teachers questions, not have to wait till the next class in order to get in contact with them or send an email and wait for them to reply and check it. So a real-time experience is what we aim to create.
Yeah. I think that's really important. Casey, when you talk about students being together as part of the learning process, there's a social component to teaching. I can train an AI model to teach you almost anything. Look at what's going on with GPT-3. It's just an incredible AI model, and it can be trained to teach you anything. But if you want a 5-year-old child to become an adult human as opposed to an adult computer, when that child scrapes its knee or has a bad interaction with another kid and needs a hug, AI models are particularly bad at that. And so it's the human part of this. I think we need to separate for a second, because we're never going to be able to fully go online from a young age. First of all, the kids don't have the attention span. It comes with its own set of immense problems. But as we get older, I think it's pretty clear that there's a place in our education for learning how to learn and learning the subject. As you pointed out, I can go on YouTube right now, and I'm boning up my linear algebra, because the kind of array math that I want to do for the AI models that we're working on for this one project requires more linear algebra than I remember from college, to tell you the truth. And I thought, well, wow, I'm going to have to, I was going to buy a book, and I said, before I do all this, let me just see what's online. I'm getting lectures on this, the greatest minds ever. And I wish I had teachers like this when I was in school. I literally wish I had them. Brilliant minds, making stuff super simple. But then you want to talk to somebody about it. And you want to rap with something, okay. And that's so desperately missing. So if we separate those two things, and we know we're going to have some hybrid solution, what does that do to an institution that really depends on room and board and food, buying the food program, and the physical edifice has to be maintained? It's a bit like, what is that great line from the movie Airplane? He's at the hospital. What is it? It's a big building with patients. He's at college. What is it? It's a campus with a bunch of rooms in it. that's college today. How does that evolve, and what do you see going on?
Well, I'm really concerned about the concept of virtual teaching at the university level because, as you say, the students can go and get a massive amount of knowledge, but interacting with one another professionally is a skill in and of itself. So that's a skill I try to teach above and beyond financial analysis. My background is not as an academic. It's having worked in professional service firms for my entire career. And so I tell the students that right up front. Don't call me Professor Borman. Don't treat me like I'm an academic in an ivory tower, but sure as heck don't treat me as your friend. I want you to treat me like I'm your boss, because that's going to be a relationship that you need to learn the norms for. And now they need to treat me like their boss in a virtual work environment. And that's challenging. I was never the boss in a virtual working environment. Nobody in any of my prior careers worked from home. And so how are they going to learn these kind of life survival skills? And you mentioned 5-year-olds. I happen to be the parent of a 5-year-old. So I'm seeing the challenges not just as a teacher, but as a parent. And I can tell you there's peer pressure that forces my little boy to pay attention to his teacher. And when he goes on a Zoom class now and sees about half of his classmates are not paying attention, that same peer pressure allows him to then go wander off the screen, do whatever the heck he wants to do until I look up from my computer and say, what's going on here? So it's nerve-wracking as a parent. It's nerve-wracking as a teacher in a large public university, and I think it would feel different if I were a private university.
Yeah, Dr. I, there are.
Yeah, I want to add to that point a little bit if I can. Yeah, so one of my favorite learning kind of model is called 70-20-10. So what this model talks about is for any transformation to happen, for a learner, a student, or a trainee, and only 10% of that transformation comes from formal learning, like reading a book, taking a class, watching a video, and that's only 10%. And 20% comes from social learning, right? Like Shelly mentioned, after I watch this video, I want to have a discussion with another person, working with a coach, a mentor, or like classmates. So that's 20%, and 70% is through application, experiential learning. So I really love that model. I think one missing link in the traditional education is that we are only focusing on the 10%. And so nowadays, with online learning and everyone's taking classes online, and so how can we nurture that sense of like community, and how can we help children to apply? I love technology. I love using technology, creative technologies. I love using social media. And we were talking about YouTube. So last year there was a big study that came out. Students actually prefer to watch YouTube videos compared to in class or group discussions, because I think we as educators we have to understand that today's students are digital learners, and we need to connect with our students where they are, not where we think they are or where we are. So if we really want to build that human connection with our students, we have to be where they are and where they hang out on a daily basis. And in my case, the answer is social media. And like for every class I teach, I create a Facebook group and I connect with my students through TikTok, through Instagram stories. So they really get to know me as a human being as opposed to be this sage on the stage. And that makes a huge difference. And because research has also shown that the completion rate for online classes is very, very low, as low as 15%. And as an entrepreneur, I purchased at least 5 online classes, and I couldn't finish any of them because there's no 20%, there's no 70%. And I think technology is such a powerful avenue for students to supplement the 20% and the 70%.
So, JR, what Dr. I is talking about is a problem that can be solved two ways. One, sociologically, because we, meaning all of us, need to adapt to the way that digital natives born of a digital age have come into the world. Most of us are either digital pioneers or digital immigrants. The millennials and the Gen Zers, they live in a different technological reality than we do. They speak differently, they act differently, they communicate differently. Because of that, we can apply technology if we can get our own sociological problems solved. I've yet to find a consensus amongst educators in any way about what K through 12 is, what it should be, what college should be, who it should be for. You get some people saying everybody should go to college for free, but no one's really talking about what they should go to college for. College is a catch-all phrase for the wealth of things you can learn in a four-year college education. So when you sat down to do NYNJA, what I was impressed with was the number of, forgive me, you threw the kitchen sink at it. It's almost like an educational version of Twitch. There's just, I got messenger services, I got video going, I got lesson plans, how are you thinking about, is where Dr. I's head is sort of where you were going, or is this a path you think that is inevitable?
I like to look at the Swiss Army knife, right? You're doing something, and all of a sudden you come across something that you need a tool for, and you don't have that tool. With the Swiss Army knife, it's pretty much anything you could open up on a Swiss Army knife could probably MacGyver you to get it done. For those of you who don't know MacGyver, that's another story for another day. But pretty much is what we use the product, and we says, okay, we came across all these shortcomings with other products that are on the market, and we kind of made this a Swiss Army knife. Yeah, it can do this. Yeah, we need a separate room. Yeah, I want to talk to that person that made a comment in the webinar I saw or the online class, but how do I get to them? In NYNJA, you just click on them, introduce yourself. It's almost like a real-time networking. So yes, Dr. I agree 100%. You need to have the flexibility in an online educational tool that can be flexible, and you can pull it out like a Swiss Army knife and says, yes, it can do this too. Simple as that.
Casey, when you think about training young financial professionals, you mentioned that what you were doing was, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, more vocational than other fields of study, in that they're going to come out with a skill they're going to apply, and they're going to use it to translate the value of their intellectual property into wealth. I'll put it that way. If it wasn't as vocational in its nature, if it were more cerebral, if it were more conceptual, what do you think you'd have the same issues, or are the issues you're facing in your mind unique to the field of study?
Well, it's financial analysis is very cerebral and very conceptual. It's just the motivation of my students is somewhat twofold. It's the GPA, because they're all very concerned, as Dr. I said, about their GPA. But I don't get the typical university student that's trying to save the world. And there's a few of them. But mostly I get the type A person that wants to go into asset management, wants to go into investment banking. And so they want to learn these skills they need to make a lot of money.
So let me rephrase my question, because I said it wrong and you called me on it. I wasn't in any way suggesting that financial services is not, and analysis isn't creative or cerebral. There are kids who are goal directed. I'm going to be in the finance industry when I leave college. That's what I mean by vocational, as opposed to I'm going to go into a 4-year liberal arts degree, understand how to think, study the history of European thought in the 17th century, and then come out and I'm going to go get a big job at a big corporation somewhere, or I won't, or I'm going to go do something else. There are different approaches to why I'm going my 4-year college. I mean, there's lots. Look, it's unique as individuals, but that's what I really meant. And I said it wrong, so I thank you for calling me out on it. But that was my question: people who are directed versus people who are kind of searching. Do you see a difference in the styles required, the tools required?
Oh, for sure. These are a very directed group of students, and I'm only qualified to teach them these tools and this analysis. I wish I could teach something more interesting like literature or art history, but a lot of my classes are dry and boring, and it involves a combination of math and rules. So that also it creates its own challenges for something like virtual learning because they can tune out more easily. And in class, I say, hey, let's form up little groups, and I'm going to try to weave this into my virtual classes because it re-engages them after you give them, some dry rules from the Financial Accounting Standards Board, and then you give them some calculations they're supposed to do after they've learned those rules. You want to get them into the analysis portion, and what's the importance of this calculation? How would you apply it in a real world job? And while I can tell them my war stories, it's better when they get together and sort of hash it out between themselves. And that's been a challenge of virtual teaching. How do you get them together? How do you assign group projects in a world where you're not allowed to tell these students to get together as a group? So,
yeah, look, I mean, it's what Dr. I said before. I had a friend of mine who's a third grade teacher, and the end of school, I think I told you I told you this story when we all first met. She had a bunch of third graders. One of the kids didn't have his shirt on. And he was eating his breakfast at like 11:30 in the morning, and he didn't want to stop eating, and he didn't want to put a shirt on. And all the girls in the class thought it was so funny, and the ones who were paying attention. And my friend Vicky, who's been teaching 28 years, and she said she doesn't even know how to wrangle third graders that are doing whatever they're doing. One's playing with this, like one's eating, one's playing video games, the other one's doing something on their iPad. There's nothing to do with the computer. They're sitting in front of their mom's computer, but they're playing on their iPad. She's like, how do you teach under these circumstances? And I actually felt for her. I was like, I don't actually know how you tell a third grader to put their shirt on and stop eating their Rice Krispies at 11:30 in the morning. And so it's harder. I think it's harder in practice than it is in theory.
Absolutely. And they know more about the technology than I do. I acknowledge that from day one. It's humanizing for them. I think they were protecting me from the Zoom bombing thing that affected UCLA and so many other universities, because they knew that I wasn't going to be able to figure out the technology, how to stop this stuff. And there's some bonding moments to it. And look, I've learned a very important skill. I didn't want to tell my boss that really I had never participated in a video conference. I had never set up a video conference. I had just participated in them. And so the concept that I was going to be setting these things up and moderating them and handling the details, he might as well have told me to run a marathon, and I'm not in marathon shape. But we figured it out, and we'll continue to make it better in the fall because we aren't going to have any in-person classes, or almost none, at UCLA. And I try to be optimistic that by the winter we'll be together back on campus, because I do think that's the best way to learn, and hopefully we'll beat this COVID thing.
Well, the good news is that with not to be a shill, but with products like NYNJA, which are basically single button presses, setting up these kinds of conferences are a little bit easier than they were a couple of years ago. Dr. I, we're coming towards the end of this thing. And I know you have so much to say on the subject. I just want to give you an opportunity to just talk a little bit about the stuff we left out.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the biggest problem I personally think is that like learning has to be personal. And when you think about a child, their learning journey, and ever since they were born from a young age, they receive a curriculum that is designed for our children, but without their involvement. And we have been homeschooling our children and with great success. And I'm shocked by how much they enjoy learning. And oftentimes they are learning about things that is not even on the curriculum. Because when we just started homeschooling our children, we did what most parents did. Hey, this is a curriculum that other people are using at school. Let's do schooling at home. Then we called that homeschooling. Now I realize that is really, really wrong because learning has to be personal. And, I think the stage on the stage model is very broken. And I think as teachers, we are guide on the side. We show up as facilitators. We work with the students. Hey, tell me what you are interested in. And how do you, if the classes are really large, I think that is going to be impossible to implement. But for small classes, for homeschooling, I don't know how many people watching this are homeschooling their own children. You can really make learning highly personal. And then when you do that, when you practice the pedagogy of listening, as opposed to I show up as the dictator, you have to do this. This is the standardized curriculum. But our children are not standardized. And standardized curriculum doesn't work. So I think as educators, we need to be better listeners and involve students to co-design their learning journey, and even in terms of how they want to learn and what they want to learn. And so that's kind of how I approach my school and how I approach my own children. But I don't know how to implement this on scale, at large classes, at large. So, but that's kind of my personal take. And I say how much my own children, my students, they have thrived. So before I ask myself this question, what is wrong with today's students? But now I ask myself, what is wrong with our educational system? Because I see transformation in my own children, in my own students, and I'm fully convinced that children are not the problem, but the problem is the environment in which our children grow.
Couldn't agree more. JR, I'm going to give you the last word.
Just in closing, Casey mentioned a bunch of times about Zoom and Zoom bombing and how the kids know the technology and the older people don't. So one thing in mind when we built our system, we made it a closed system, which is so important because you literally know everybody that is in that group and in that training session and in that classroom. It's clear if somebody's going to do something wrong, you know exactly who it is. Just like if you were in class and somebody misbehaved, you would give them, reprimand them. So we built this with that specifically in mind. So a Zoom bombing in NYNJA, when it's a closed environment in a closed group that you created, just the chances of it happening are it's almost impossible. And that's what I would like to leave everybody with, the security aspect of the NYNJA platform. I have 2 young children too, and that is something that was at the top of my list to make sure we had to take them off Instagram and Snapchat because people got their IDs and now their friends are on NYNJA and their groups. I know all the kids. If somebody says a bad word, it wasn't deleted. Snapchat didn't delete it. I can go back and see somebody said the wrong thing and my daughter can't hide it or said, oh, I can't show it anymore. It was deleted. So this, even in a one-to-one outside the education and just where kids are gathering, is what we thought about in the security of the NYNJA system. And that's what I want to kind of leave everybody with.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. I. Thanks, Casey. Thank you, JR. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I think we're at our allotted time. I will ask our host if we have time for questions. If not, we will wish you all goodbye. But let's ask a quick question. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we can ask 1 or 2 quick questions. Sure.
Are there any questions? That's the question.
I got a question. This has really been phenomenal. Thank you, Shelly and everybody for doing this. For international kids or kids that speak multilingual, or ESL situations with immigrants or anything where it's language barrier on top of this, what are the recommendations for how to go virtual with those situations?
Dr. I?
Yeah, I can answer that. Actually, our children are bilingual. They speak English and Chinese. And again, I use so many different creative technologies and social media. My personal favorite is called Adobe Spark, and it is free. Everyone can use it. So what my children do is they practice collaborative storytelling. Storytelling is a very important 21st century skill, and collaboration is another important one of the 4 C's of the 21st century students. So we just use a platform, and my children start writing whatever stories they are interested in talking about, and in Chinese, whatever language they are learning. And you can invite with social media, you can invite a child from China or from Hong Kong or Taiwan to be part of the story, to collect out something. Of course, they can also do video chat. And technology has made learning so much easier. I'm just thinking in real life, we're in Maryland right now, the likelihood for my kid to go out to run into someone his age speaks Chinese is pretty slim. But with social media and technology, we can be highly targeted. And I know the kids that he's connecting with, so kind of secure and under our eyes, so to speak. And it has been working really well and more fun. They can customize the emojis, all those things. So that's kind of how we approach this.
Thank you.
There's also an organization called Encantos, Encantos. It's a really, it's a startup. It's an educational platform that is dedicated to bilingual education, trilingual education. And I think it's interesting, the guy who founded it, Stephen Wolf Pereira, very, very, very smart CMO who has bilingual children, he looked everywhere for tools. He looked everywhere for educational supplemental things, apps, books, methodologies. Couldn't find it. You know what? I'm going to get it built. So private industry is starting to step up where the educational system is. You just check it out. It's really fun. And they're trying to make it, they're doing it the way that a for-profit startup would do it, although they're a B Corp and they're purpose-driven. But to me, it's like that just, the fact that that's not Scholastic or one of the big companies that we always associate with educational tools, in one way, it doesn't surprise me. In another way, I'm sad. You'd want the incumbent organizations to recognize the needs of so many bilingual and trilingual kids in our world that are just not being served. So check out Encantos. And Adobe Spark is a cool collaborative tool. It certainly is. I think we have time for one more question if there is one.
I have a quick question. I mean, this is maybe for the panel. Is there an optimal amount of time to do a course in online learning? Similarly, you'd go to a classroom for an hour. What does the group or the panel seem as the optimal time for a course?
Great question. Dr. I?
I think it really depends. And I see some online Zoom classes like 3 hours. I think that is brutal. I can't do it myself. I think depending on children's age, like younger, probably shorter classes, we want to make them super interactive. For big people, like older students, 45 minutes each. And again, like for my Zoom sessions, we do Zoom break, like, stretch out, do some yoga poses, do a quick dance, like some sort of body movement to energize the students. But yeah, so I think 45 minutes at most, especially if they are learning about things they are not personally interested in. So 5 minutes can be way too long. Yeah.
JR, do you have some data on what's optimal? Oops, you're muted.
Generally speaking, it ranges on what the topic is, and it can range from 15-minute sprints to 45 minutes in that range, depending on the topic and how interactive it is. So it's not, there's no norm, really.
There you go.
I'll echo what Dr. I said. So I think as a broader problem, faculty feel inclined to do whatever they were doing before virtual learning. So I was teaching a 75-minute class, and so I feel inclined to give them 75 minutes. But what I did was I've got 2 asynchronous portions of the class, sort of 5 to 10 minute videos. And I tell them I expect them to have watched the first one before class starts. And then I tell them they should watch the second one. I think a lot of them have watched it before class starts as well. But then that gives them a sort of 5 to 10 minute break. So I say, so I take that 75-minute class and I break it into sort of 2 30-minute discussion groups with supposedly an asynchronous video in between them. But if they want to take that time then to stretch or use the restroom or grab a bite to eat, it gives a break between these shorter sessions. And I did at one point teach a nearly 3-hour class. If you did that on Zoom, you would literally, I have no idea what the students would do.
They would melt. They would know. And anyway, we're coming up on a 40-minute mark right now. So to prevent everybody here from burning out, at the optimal moment for a online chat, online panel, online class, I want to thank Dr. I and Casey and JR, and thank everyone here for joining us today on the NYNJA platform to learn about education, the state thereof, and what we're doing for our posterity. Thanks again, everybody, and thank you to NYNJA for hosting today, and we'll see you next time.
Try NYNJA now at www.nynja.work.